The gun clicked behind the flower girl, but Yoon Ha-eun turned toward the sound before anyone else noticed. She stood beneath the warm gold spill of a restaurant sign, one hand resting on a wicker basket filled with white chrysanthemums and pale pink roses, the other gripping the thin wooden cane against the pavement. The evening crowd moved around her in polished coats and dark suits, shoes tapping over stone, perfume mixing with the buttery smell drifting from the restaurant doors. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked if she needed help. To most people, Ha-eun was simply the blind flower girl who stood near the curb every night, easy to pass, easier to ignore. Then she heard the black sedan. Its engine was already idling across the street, low and steady, but the sound changed when another vehicle rolled quietly into the alley behind it. Ha-eun tilted her head. One engine, then another. A door opened. Soft leather creaked. A shoe touched pavement. She counted 3 footsteps, paused, then heard a fourth that did not belong with the others. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her cane. Someone nearby laughed. A waiter carried a tray through the restaurant entrance, crystal glasses chiming softly against one another. Then the crowd shifted, and a different sound reached her. The measured rhythm of several men approaching from the opposite sidewalk. "Mr. Park is here," someone whispered. Ha-eun had heard that name before. Everyone in Seoul had. Park Kang-ho, the man whose presence could make a crowded room suddenly lower its voice. The black sedan stopped directly in front of the restaurant, its headlights washing over the wet pavement. 2 bodyguards stepped out first, their coats brushing against the car doors. Then Kang-ho emerged. His black suit was perfectly fitted, the silver watch at his wrist catching one brief line of light. He did not rush. He never seemed to need to. His shoes struck the pavement with 3 quiet, deliberate taps as he walked toward the restaurant, while the people nearby instinctively moved aside. Ha-eun could not see him, but she could hear the difference in the street when he arrived. Conversations softened. Footsteps changed. Direction. Even the restaurant door seemed to open more carefully. She lowered her face toward the flowers, pretending to arrange the stems. Then she smelled something sharp beneath the restaurant's roasted garlic and expensive cologne. Metal. Oil. Something recently handled. Her breathing stopped for half a second. The sound came again from across the street. A tiny mechanical movement. Click. Ha-eun turned her head toward Kang-ho. He was only seconds from entering the restaurant. "Sir," she called. Her voice was small beneath the traffic. Kang-ho kept walking. One bodyguard glanced at her and continued forward. Ha-eun stepped out from behind her basket, nearly knocking the chrysanthemums onto the pavement. "Mr. Park." This time, Kang-ho stopped. His face turned slightly toward her voice. The street seemed to hold its breath. Ha-eun lifted her chin, listening past the traffic, past the restaurant music, past the footsteps surrounding him. Then she heard it again, closer now. A weapon being prepared. Her hand released the cane. "Don't go inside," she whispered. Kang-ho's eyes narrowed. Across the street, something metallic shifted in the darkness. And Ha-eun suddenly realized the sound was not coming from one direction. There were 2 shooters. Kang-ho did not move. Instead, he raised one hand, and every bodyguard froze where they stood. The restaurant's golden doorway spilled warm light across the pavement, while the cold metal of the sedan reflected it in thin strips. Ha-eun heard the fabric of his coat shift as he turned toward her. "Say that again," he ordered. His voice was low, controlled, close enough now that she could hear the faint rasp of his breath. Ha-eun swallowed and tightened her fingers around the cane lying beside her basket. "Don't go inside." One bodyguard stepped forward. "Sir, she's just a street vendor." Kang-ho lifted 2 fingers. The man stopped. Nobody spoke. Somewhere behind them, a glass touched a saucer with a delicate click. "I listened." The street had changed. The first vehicle was still idling, but the second engine had gone silent. That silence was worse. Kang-ho looked across the road, then at the alley, measuring the darkness, without showing a trace of urgency. "What did you hear?" he asked. "Someone preparing a weapon." A bodyguard gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Kang-ho turned his head. The laugh died instantly. "Where?" he asked. Ha-eun pointed toward the restaurant entrance. Not there. Her hand shifted toward the alley. And another one. She stopped, listening harder. A taxi passed, tires hissing over damp asphalt. Its headlights swept across parked cars, glass windows, and the silver hood of Kang-ho's sedan. For one brief second, Ha-eun caught the scent again. Oil, cold metal, and something sharp beneath it. Across the street, she said. Kang-ho made a decision. He stepped away from the restaurant door. Get everyone inside. His men immediately moved. One bodyguard opened the rear door of the sedan, while another guided Kang-ho toward the vehicle. Ha-eun heard the sudden rush of shoes, the whisper of coats, the restaurant staff pulling customers away from the windows. She reached down and grabbed her flower basket. Wait. Kang-ho stopped. You heard them before my men did, he said. It was not a question. Ha-eun lowered her voice. Because nobody notices what they hear when they think they already know what they're looking at. For the first time, silence came from him. Then Kang-ho walked back toward her. His shoes stopped less than 3 feet away. Get in the car.
Ha-eun stiffened.
Why? Because if you're right, you're standing in the worst place in Seoul. She shook her head. I don't know you. You don't need to. He pointed toward the sedan. You need to decide whether you want to live long enough to tell me what you heard. Ha-eun turned toward the street. The engine across the road remained silent. Then a faint vibration traveled through the pavement beneath her shoes. A vehicle was moving without headlights. Kang-ho heard it too. His hand dropped toward his coat as his bodyguards closed around him. Ha-eun lifted her cane and stepped backward, away from the restaurant. They're moving now, she whispered. Kang-ho looked toward the darkness. Then he looked at the blind flower girl standing alone beneath the restaurant lights. Get her behind me, he ordered. For the first time that night, the most feared man on the street placed the girl everyone ignored directly inside his protection. Sua Kang-ho's order sent the street into motion. His bodyguards formed a tight line around Ha-eun, their dark coats brushing against her sleeves as the restaurant's golden light slid across the polished pavement. She held her flower basket against her chest, the wicker pressing into her palm, while the cold night air carried the smell of rainwater, gasoline, and roses. Move, Kang-ho said. Ha-eun did not. My flowers. One of the bodyguards reached for the basket, but Ha-eun caught his wrist before he could lift it. Carefully. The man glanced at Kang-ho. Kang-ho gave a small nod. Carefully. The basket was returned to her hands. Kang-ho watched her fingers straighten the crushed stems one by one. White chrysanthemums. Pale pink roses. A few green leaves bent beneath the weight. You came here every night, he asked. Almost every night. Why here? People coming out of restaurants have money. Her answer was simple. Kang-ho looked toward the restaurant, where waiters were now drawing the curtains across the windows. And you sell enough? Sometimes. He reached into his coat and pulled out his wallet. Ha-eun heard the leather open. How much? For what? The flowers. You don't need flowers. Kang-ho placed several bills into the basket anyway. The paper made a soft flutter against the petals. Ha-eun touched one bill with 2 fingers, then pushed most of it back toward him. One bouquet doesn't cost that much. Tonight it does. She shook her head. Then I won't sell them to you. For a moment neither moved. The city hummed around them. Traffic tires whispering over wet asphalt, a distant subway rumbling beneath the pavement, the restaurant's ventilation system humming above the awning. Kang-ho slowly took the money back. Fiend. Ha-eun lifted a single white chrysanthemum from the basket and held it toward him. Then take this. He stared at the flower. Why? Because you stopped when everyone else kept walking. Kang-ho accepted it. His fingers closed around the cool green stem. You give flowers to strangers. Often, only the ones who listen. Something shifted in his expression, almost too small to catch. He looked at the flower, then at her cane. Get in the car. You already asked. I'm asking again. And I'm saying no. Kang-ho stepped closer, stopping a respectful distance away. Then walk with me. Ha-eun tilted her head. Where? Somewhere safer. He turned toward the restaurant side entrance and began walking. After 3 steps, he stopped. Ha-eun had not followed. You said everyone ignored you, he said. I didn't say everyone. Kang-ho looked back. She tapped the pavement once with her cane and began walking. Her cane found the curb, then the smooth stone beside it. She did not need his hand. At the side entrance, Kang-ho opened the heavy door himself. Warm air rolled over them, carrying coffee, polished wood, and the faint scent of cedar from the walls.
Aeon paused.
You opened it for me. You said you notice who listens, he replied. She stepped inside. Behind them, the door shut with a thick metallic click. Kang-ho remained beside her instead of sending a guard ahead. Then he held out the white chrysanthemum. Keep it.
Aeon smiled faintly.
I thought you bought it. I did. He placed it back into her hand. But I want you to stay with me tonight. His voice hardened on the final words. That's not a request anymore. The door slammed behind Ha-eun, and Kang-ho immediately changed direction, leading her away from the restaurant's main entrance. His shoes struck the polished stone floor in a steady rhythm, while the warm air smelled of coffee, cedar, and expensive leather.
Keep walking, he said.
Ha-eun followed the sound of his voice, her cane tapping once, twice, 3 times across the smooth floor. Where are you taking me? Somewhere the street can't reach you. That sounds like a promise. It is. They entered a private corridor lined with dark wood panels. The lights above them were soft and amber, reflected in narrow brass strips along the walls. Kang-ho stopped at a heavy door and opened it. Inside was a quiet private room, its walls covered in deep green fabric and its table made from dark walnut. Ha-eun stepped across the threshold, then stopped. Too quiet. Kang-ho looked at her. What? I can hear the refrigerator. A faint hum came from the corner. And the ventilation fan. She turned her face toward the ceiling. But I can't hear anyone outside the door. Kang-ho glanced at the bodyguard standing in the corridor. Clear the hallway. The man immediately moved. Footsteps faded. Kang-ho closed the door. The latch clicked. Ha-eun placed her basket on the table. One bruised rose rolled against the wicker edge. Kang-ho noticed it. You were almost knocked over outside. I was protecting the flowers. You could have been hurt. So could you. He stared at her for a moment, then pulled out a chair.
Seat.
She ran her fingers along the chair back before lowering herself into it. Kang-ho remained standing. Tell me what you heard before I arrived. Ha-eun shook her head. Not yet. His jaw tightened slightly. You're in my building, surrounded by my men, and you refuse to answer? You brought me here. To keep you alive. Then let me help you. She lifted the white chrysanthemum he had returned to her and placed it on the table between them. I heard the first engine before your car arrived. Then a second engine. Then footsteps. For men.
Kang-ho's gaze sharpened.
4. At least. You said 2 shooters. I heard 2 weapons. The others were moving. She touched the flower stem. But that's not why I stopped you. Kang-ho leaned against the table. Then why? Ha-eun turned her face toward him. Because when your car stopped, everyone around you changed. Meaning? Your men watched the street. The people watched you. But one person watched the restaurant door. Kang-ho went still. Ha-eun continued. That person wasn't moving like a customer. The room fell silent except for the low mechanical hum in the corner. Kang-ho reached for his phone. Show me where. Ha-eun pointed toward the wall. Not there. She stood, crossed the room, and placed her palm against the cool glass beside the door. Here. Kang-ho followed. Why? Because the sound bounced differently. He studied the glass. Then Ha-eun heard something through the wall, a faint vibration, followed by the unmistakable scrape of a shoe. Her hand snapped back. Someone is outside. Kang-ho turned toward the door. Before he could speak, the lights flickered once. Then the entire private room went dark. Ha-eun's cane struck the floor as she reached for Kang-ho's sleeve. Don't open that door. A shadow moved beneath the narrow gap. Kang-ho stepped between her and the entrance. Nobody comes through that door, he said quietly. Not tonight. Then the handle began to turn. The door handle stopped turning. Kang-ho raised one hand, and Ha-eun felt the movement beside her before hearing his sleeve brush the table. The room smelled of cedar and coffee, while the air conditioner pushed a thin stream of cold air across her face. "Stay behind me," he said. Ha-eun tightened her grip on the white chrysanthemum. "No," Kang-ho turned toward her.
No.
"If I stay behind you, I can't hear what's happening." His jaw shifted. For a moment, neither moved. Then the handle turned again. Kang-ho reached for the light switch, but Ha-eun caught his wrist. "Don't." "Why?" "The person outside wants you to open the door." She moved her cane across the floor, searching for the edge of the wall. "So, don't give them what they want." Kang-ho slowly lowered his hand. A faint scrape came from the other side. Then silence.
Ha-eun listened.
Nothing.
No breathing. No footsteps.
Only the refrigerator humming in the corner and rain ticking against the narrow window. Kang-ho stepped toward the door, anyway. "What are you doing?" "Changing the rules." He crossed to a second door hidden behind a dark wooden panel and pulled it open. Cold air rushed through the narrow passage, carrying the smell of concrete and rain. "This leads to the service corridor," he said. "You can walk." "I can." "Then stay close." They moved through the passage, Kang-ho ahead, Ha-eun following with her cane tapping against the concrete. Behind them, the private room door opened. A chair scraped across the floor. Kang-ho stopped. "They're inside." Ha-eun heard footsteps enter the room. Then another sound, a phone vibrating against wood. Kang-ho pulled her farther down the corridor. "Keep moving." They reached a steel staircase. Ha-eun placed one hand on the railing. Its surface was cold and slightly wet. Kang-ho descended beside her, matching his pace to the rhythm of her cane. "How many floors?" she asked. "2. "And the car?" "Waiting below." "Then we're leaving." "Not yet." He stopped on the landing.
Why?
Kang-ho looked back toward the corridor. "Because if they followed us, I want them to believe we are still upstairs." Ha-eun turned her face toward him. "You're using me as bait. I'm keeping you close." "That's not the same thing." He did not answer. Instead, he removed his dark jacket and placed it around her shoulders. The fabric was warm, carrying the faint scent of cedar and his cologne. "Put this on."
Why?
"Because, when we leave, I need you to look like me from a distance." Ha-eun's fingers touched the sleeve. "That could put me in danger." "It could." She stood still for 2 seconds. Then she handed the jacket back. "No," Kang-ho stared at her. "I'm not hiding behind you," she said. "And I'm not pretending to be you." She lifted her cane and pointed toward the lower stairwell. "But I will walk beside you." Kang-ho took the jacket from her, folded it over his arm, and nodded once.
Fin?
They descended. At the bottom, the service door opened into a narrow alley washed in blue security light. The black sedan waited 20 yards away, engine running, exhaust curling into the cold air. Kang-ho stepped outside first. Ha-eun followed. Then she stopped. Her cane touched the pavement once.
Twice.
Her head turned toward the street.
Go.
He looked back. "What?" She reached for his sleeve. "Don't get in that car." The sedan's engine suddenly revved. Kang-ho stared at it. Ha-eun's voice dropped to a whisper. "That isn't your driver." Sua Kang-ho stared at the sedan as its engine growled beneath the alley lights, exhaust curling white against the cold air. Ha-eun's fingers remained locked around his sleeve. "That's my car," he said. "Not your driver," she replied. The rear window lowered halfway. A man's voice came through the opening. "Mr. Park, we need to move."
Now.
Kang-ho did not answer. Instead, he stepped backward, pulling Ha-eun with him behind the concrete corner. The sedan's headlights suddenly snapped off. Darkness swallowed the alley. Then a sharp crack split the air. A metal sign above them rattled. Ha-eun flinched but stayed upright, her cane scraping against the wall. Kang-ho pushed her lower. "Stay down." More sharp reports followed, striking stone somewhere beyond them. No graphic chaos, only shattered glass, ringing metal, and hurried footsteps echoing between the buildings. Kang-ho looked toward the street. "Can you hear where they are?" Ha-eun pressed her palm against the concrete. "Don't ask me to see." I'm asking you to listen. She closed her eyes. Rain tapped the metal fire escape overhead. The sedan engine was still running. A door slammed. 2 sets of shoes moved toward the alley mouth. Another set remained near the car. Ha-eun lifted her hand. 3.
Kang-ho waited.
2 are coming from the street. 1 is behind the car. He nodded once. Then he pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and switched it on. The narrow beam cut across the wall. Stay here. Ha-eun caught his wrist.
No.
If you move, they'll hear you. She turned her face toward the alley. Wait.
Kang-ho froze.
A phone began vibrating somewhere near the sedan.
Once. Twice.
3 times. Then silence. Ha-eun pointed toward the opposite side.
Now.
Kang-ho moved instantly, taking her with him through a narrow service passage. Their shoes splashed through shallow rainwater, and the smell of wet concrete mixed with gasoline. They reached a locked gate. Kang-ho grabbed the chain and pulled. It held. Ha-eun touched the metal beside it. There's another way. Where? She tapped her cane against the wall.
Hollow.
Again. Hollow. Behind this. Kang-ho struck the panel with his shoulder. It shifted, revealing a narrow maintenance opening. After you. Ha-eun ducked through. Kang-ho followed, pulling the panel closed behind them. Outside, footsteps rushed past. The 2 waited in darkness, breathing quietly. Then Kang-ho whispered, "You just saved me again." Ha-eun shook her head. "Not yet." "What do you mean?" She lifted her face toward the muffled street noise. The footsteps outside stopped. A car door opened. Then another.
Ha-eun.
Heard the engine change pitch. Her hand found Kang-ho's wrist. They're not leaving. He looked toward the sealed opening. They're waiting. A second later, the alley lights came back on. Through the narrow gap, Kang-ho saw the sedan reverse toward the building. His own car was blocking the only clear exit. Then his phone vibrated. One message appeared on the screen. "Come out alone, or the girl pays the price." Kang-ho read it once. He locked the screen and looked at Ha-eun. "Stay here." She shook her head. "No," he reached for the panel. "Then stay beside me." Together, they stepped back toward the alley. Sua Kang-ho pushed the service door open, and cold air swept through the narrow passage, carrying rain, exhaust, and the faint smell of wet stone. Ha-eun stayed beside him, her cane tapping softly against the pavement as they stepped into the alley. The black sedan waited 20 yards away, headlights dark, engine rumbling low enough to vibrate through the soles of their shoes. "Stay close," Kang-ho said. Ha-eun shook her head. "Not close. Beside you." He glanced at her, then nodded. They moved forward together. The sedan suddenly rolled backward, tires whispering over the wet pavement. Kang-ho stopped. A second vehicle turned into the far end of the alley, blocking the street. Its headlights flooded the walls with white light. Ha-eun raised her cane. "We're trapped." Kang-ho reached inside his coat, but she caught his wrist. "Don't." "Why?" "Because they want you to react." Her voice stayed calm. "They're waiting for you to move toward the car." Kang-ho looked at the sedan, then at the vehicle behind them. For once, he followed her lead. "Then what do we do?" Ha-eun turned her head toward the buildings. "There." She pointed toward a narrow staircase leading to a covered walkway above the alley. Kang-ho grabbed the railing and tested it. "Solid." "Can you climb?" "Yes." He went first, but halfway up, Ha-eun stopped. "Wait. What now?" "Your phone." Kang-ho pulled it from his pocket. The screen glowed against the darkness. One new message. 30 seconds. Kang-ho's eyes hardened. "They're giving us a deadline." Ha-eun placed one hand on the railing.
Then.
"Don't waste it." He put the phone away. "Go." They climbed quickly. Metal steps rang beneath their shoes, cold rain striking the railings like tiny beads of glass. At the top, Kang-ho pushed through a maintenance door and pulled Ha-eun inside. They entered a dim corridor lined with concrete walls and exposed pipes. A red emergency light pulsed overhead. "Which way?" Kang-ho asked.
Ha-eun listened.
"Left." He turned left. "Why?" "The right side carries traffic noise." The left is empty. They moved deeper into the building. Behind them, a door slammed open. Footsteps entered the stairwell. Kang-ho stopped and looked back. Ha-eun reached for his sleeve. Keep going. They're coming. I know. Her cane struck the floor once. But they're following the sound of your shoes. Kang-ho immediately removed his dress shoes. He carried them in one hand and walked silently in his socks across the cold concrete. Ha-eun almost smiled. You listen fast. I have to. They reached another door. Kang-ho opened it and found a small rooftop access platform overlooking the alley. Below, the two vehicles remained positioned exactly where they had been. Then a third car appeared at the intersection. Kang-ho watched it stop. A man stepped out and raised a phone. Mr. Park, a voice called through a loudspeaker. You have 10 seconds. Ha-eun's fingers closed around the white chrysanthemum still tucked into her basket. Kang-ho stepped in front of her. They want me. Ha-eun shook her head. No, she turned toward the voice below. They want the girl who heard them. Kang-ho looked at her. Then they made one mistake. He stepped to the rooftop edge, no longer hiding. They gave me a reason to stop running. The man below lifted his phone. Kang-ho's voice cut through the alley. You wanted me alone. You got the opposite. He reached for Ha-eun's hand, not to pull her behind him, but to place her beside him at the edge of the light. Now, let's see who is brave enough to come for her. Sua, the man below, lowered his phone, and the alley went strangely quiet. Rain ticked against the rooftop railing, while the red emergency light painted Kang-ho's face in alternating shadows.
Ha-eun stood
beside him, her white chrysanthemum trembling lightly between her fingers. You heard us, the voice called from below. That is why you were chosen. Kang-ho's expression changed. Chosen for what? No answer came immediately. Instead, a car door opened. Ha-eun turned toward the sound. Someone is getting out. Kang-ho stepped closer to the edge. Who? I don't know. She listened again. But he isn't walking like the others. The man below finally spoke. The girl was never supposed to leave that street. Kang-ho's hand tightened around the rooftop railing. The cold metal creaked beneath his grip. Why? Because she heard a conversation that wasn't meant for her. Ha-eun lowered the flower. The petals brushed against her coat. I heard someone say your name. Kang-ho looked at her. When? Before you arrived tonight. Near the restaurant. Her voice stayed quiet. Two men were talking beside the alley. They mentioned you, the car, and a meeting that was supposed to happen after midnight. Kang-ho said nothing. Ha-eun continued. I didn't understand everything, but I remembered the voice. A vehicle door slammed below. Kang-ho turned toward the sound. Whose voice? Ha-eun raised her face. The man who just told us I was chosen. Silence settled over the rooftop. Then Kang-ho removed his phone and made one call. Lock every exit around the block, he said. Nobody leaves. He ended the call and looked at Ha-eun. You're coming with me. Where? Somewhere they can't reach you. And what about the man downstairs? He can wait. Kang-ho reached for the stairwell door, but Ha-eun caught his sleeve. No, he stopped. What now? If you take me away, they'll disappear. She turned toward the alley. They want you focused on saving me. Kang-ho studied her for several seconds. Then what do you suggest? Ha-eun placed the chrysanthemum carefully inside her flower basket. Let them believe you are still protecting me. She pointed toward the rooftop's opposite side. But move your men somewhere they can't hear. Kang-ho's mouth tightened into the faintest smile. You have a plan. I have ears. Tonight, that's better. He followed her instructions. His bodyguards moved through the building without announcing themselves, while Kang-ho remained beside Ha-eun beneath the red emergency light. Minutes later, footsteps sounded below. A man entered the alley and looked up. Mr. Park, he called. Send the girl down and this ends. Kang-ho stepped into view. You came all this way for a flower girl? The man laughed. She's not a flower girl anymore. Ha-eun's fingers stopped over the basket. Kang-ho's eyes narrowed. What did you just say? The man's smile disappeared. She heard too much. Kang-ho stepped forward. Then you made the mistake of underestimating her. The man looked toward Ha-eun. She heard who ordered the ambush. Kang-ho turned sharply toward her. Ha-eun stood perfectly still. The alley seemed to shrink around them. Then she whispered, "I didn't know that voice belonged to someone you trusted." Kang-ho looked toward the darkness below. For the first time that night, the hunters had stopped chasing him. They were trying to silence the woman who had saved his life. And Kang-ho finally understood why. Kang-ho stepped forward before the man below could speak again, his bare feet silent against the damp concrete, while the red emergency light pulsed across the rooftop. Ha-eun stood beside him, one hand resting on her flower basket, the white chrysanthemum still tucked carefully among the stems. "You wanted me," Kang-ho said. "You have me." The man below lifted his phone. "Not exactly."
Kang-ho's gaze hardened.
"Then explain." A second voice came from the alley entrance. "He means her." Kang-ho turned toward the sound, and Ha-eun heard several footsteps closing in from behind them. For the first time, the men who had been hunting them were no longer hiding. Kang-ho stepped in front of Ha-eun. "Stay here." She caught his sleeve.
No.
"You promised I would stay beside you." He looked at her hand, then nodded. "Beside me." They descended the metal stairs together. Each step rang through the narrow structure, cold rain sliding down the rail beneath Ha-eun's palm. At the bottom, the alley had filled with men and vehicles. Headlights cut through the darkness, reflecting off puddles like broken strips of
glass.
The man who had spoken stepped forward. "Mr. Park, this ends tonight." Kang-ho looked around. "You brought half a street to threaten one woman?" She heard something she shouldn't have. "And you failed to silence her." The man glanced at Ha-eun. "She saved your life. That was the problem." Kang-ho's eyes narrowed. "You knew she would be there." The man said nothing. Ha-eun suddenly lifted her cane and tapped the pavement twice.
Kang-ho.
He turned.
What?
"The man in front isn't giving orders." She pointed toward the black sedan. "His voice is different." Kang-ho looked past him. A figure stood beside the vehicle, mostly hidden by the headlights. Then the figure stepped forward.
"È un frose."
She knew that voice. "Mr. Park," the man said calmly. "You are always difficult to control." Kang-ho stared at him. "You." The man had been one of his trusted security advisors, the same man who had stood near the restaurant earlier that evening. Kang-ho's expression went still. The man raised his hands slightly. "This was supposed to be simple. You arrive, you enter the restaurant, the ambush happens, and nobody asks questions." Ha-eun's fingers tightened around the basket. "But I heard you." "Yes." The man looked at her. "You heard my voice." Kang-ho moved between them. "You used to blind Flower Girl as an obstacle between yourself and me. I underestimated her. You underestimated both of us." Kang-ho pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward him. "Your men are surrounded." Sirens sounded in the distance, growing louder between the buildings. The trader's face changed. Kang-ho's security team emerged from the surrounding entrances, blocking every route through the alley. No shots followed.
No chaos.
Just footsteps, commands, and the sudden realization that the balance had shifted. Kang-ho walked toward the man. "You tried to kill me because you thought nobody would notice what happened to a man like me."
He stopped.
"But you forgot the one person everyone else ignored." He turned toward Ha-eun. She stood beneath the pale security light, her basket against her coat. Kang-ho walked back to her and carefully removed the crushed white chrysanthemum from
the basket.
"You saved my life tonight." Ha-eun shook her head. "I only listened." "Everyone else had eyes," he said quietly. "You were the only one who saw the danger." By dawn, the alley was empty. Kang-ho returned Ha-eun to the street where she had sold flowers, but this time he did not walk past her. He bought every flower in her basket and placed the money in her hand, exactly as she had taught him, without pity and without spectacle. Ha-eun held the final white chrysanthemum between her fingers. "Will you come back?" Kang-ho asked. She smiled. "Only if you listen." He looked toward the waking city, then back at the woman everyone had once ignored. And that morning, the man who ruled Seoul's darkest streets finally understood that the person with the least power in the room could be the one who saved his life.